and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteus and you are watching The World Report. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines. Ukraine is hit by the single largest Russian drone attack of the entire conflict. This comes of the eve of the war's third anniversary, with reports of at least 3 casualties. Israel halts the release of over 600 Palestinian prisoners after Hamas released 6 Israeli hostages. Israel cites the humiliating handovers of hostages as the reason for the delay. Germany heads to the polls in its national snap election today. The CDU candidate Friedrich Merz is the frontrunner, with the far-right AfD party predicted to make historic gains in German parliament. A knife attack in eastern France leaves 1 dead and 2 injured. French President Emmanuel Macron labels it an Islamist terror attack. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has decided to delay the release of Palestinian prisoners. This comes after the state alleged that Israeli hostages have been made to go through humiliating rituals. On the other hand, Palestinian families wait for their loved ones in distress. Here is the full report.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office has halted the release of Palestinian prisoners planned for Saturday. The government took the call based on the alleged humiliation of Israeli hostages. Now, the freeing will take place after the release of the next hostages is guaranteed and without the rituals of humiliation. Since the ceasefire came into effect on January 19th, Hamas has released 25 Israeli hostages in well-rehearsed handovers, with masked men parading the captives on stage and forcing them to wave at Gazans gathered to watch. In the 7th scheduled prisoner hostage swap, Hamas released 6 Israeli captives on Saturday, while Israel put off releasing Palestinian prisoners. Hamas called the move a blatant violation of the truce deal. Israel had been expected to release more than 600 Palestinian prisoners. From Washington, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio warned that Hamas would be destroyed if it did not release all remaining hostages. Families of the Palestinian prisoners, meanwhile, waited hours on Saturday for their loved ones to be released from Israeli custody, only to be disappointed.
والله ما بقول لك يعني مشاعر انقلب الفرح لحزن. احنا بقول لك من الصبح الفرح لحزن حسبنا الله ونعم.
ابني والله اسير من 13/11 وجينا هنا نستنى فيه إنه من الساعة 9 وعامل ان شاء الله انهم يفرجوا عنهم، نستناهم نحضنهم نشوفهم، لكن نتنياهو دائما بماطل. طب سلموا أسرى، ليش يعمل إلغاء الصفقة؟ ليش يغل؟ طب ليش؟
On the other hand, Israeli protesters rally in Tel Aviv calling for the return of all remaining captives. Bureau Report, NewsX.
We'll now take a look at some news updates from across North America. The leader of the far-right Proud Boys, Enrique Tarrio, was arrested outside the US Capitol on Friday. The arrest followed a news conference where he and other Proud Boys members announced plans to sue the US Justice Department over their imprisonment. Tarrio, who was pardoned by Trump for his role in the January 6th riot, faces allegations of striking a woman's phone and her arm. California Governor Gavin Newsom has requested $40 billion in federal aid to help rebuild areas of Los Angeles devastated by January's wildfires, which killed 26 people and displaced 150,000. The funds would support recovery efforts, including debris removal and tax incentives. President Trump previously expressed doubts about federal aid to California, citing water supply issues. Measles outbreaks in Texas and New Mexico now have nearly 100 cases, mostly consisting of unvaccinated children and teens. Health officials are concerned as vaccination rates drop in some areas due to anti-vaccine sentiment. Texas has seen a rise in vaccine exemptions, especially in Gaines County, where most cases have occurred. Health authorities are urging people to get vaccinated and stop the spread. President Donald Trump is set to appoint newly confirmed FBI Director Kash Patel as the acting head of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives. Patel, a Trump loyalist, will oversee both the FBI and ATF during a time of growing challenges. Despite opposition from Democrats and moderate Republicans, Patel's nomination gained strong support from Republicans. The FDA is reaching out to rehire some of the scientists it recently fired, including those reviewing Elon Musk's company, Neuralink. Around 300 employees could be brought back after President Trump's recent cuts to the agency. The move follows a broader trend of rehiring federal workers, but many scientists are unsure about returning due to concerns over job stability and pay. Voting opens Sunday in a German general election that opinion polls suggest will bring a new chancellor and a new governing coalition. The country's elections are often a little dry and predictable, but this campaign has been eventful by comparison. Here is a full report.
Germans are going to the polls after an intense election campaign dominated by their country's faltering economy and a succession of deadly attacks that have made migration and security a focal issue. Friedrich Merz, the 69-year-old conservative leader, is in pole position to become Germany's next chancellor in a vote closely watched in Europe and the US. He promises to fix most problems in 4 years, a tall order for Europe's biggest economy and a creaking infrastructure.
Ich werde als Bundeskanzler der Bundesrepublik Deutschland wieder aktiv teilnehmen an der Gestaltung der europäischen Politik und Deutschland wird mit mir wieder eine starke Stimme in der Europäischen Union haben.
If Merz's Christian Democrats win, he will need to forge an alliance with at least one other party, most likely Olaf Scholz's Social Democrats, whose government collapsed late last year. On the eve of the vote, Merz was adamant there would be no deal with the far-right Alternative for Germany, which is poised to become the second biggest political force, ahead of Scholz's center-left party.
Keiner von uns kann heute sicher sein, dass das, was wir 75 Jahre hatten, auch in den nächsten 20 und 30 Jahren fortbesteht. Und deswegen ist diese Wahl morgen eine Schicksalswahl für Deutschland.
Some 59.2 million Germans are eligible to vote, and while millions already have by post, polls indicate as many 20% were undecided ahead of election day. The polls close at 17 GMT, with a clear idea of a result likely to emerge during the evening. Bureau Report, NewsX.
Now let's take a look at some news updates from across South America. At least 6 people died and 78 were injured after a food court roof collapsed at the Real Plaza shopping center in Trujillo, Peru. The accident happened on Friday evening and rescue teams are still searching for survivors. Among the injured, 48 were hospitalized with 3 in serious condition and 10 were children. The cause of the collapse is still unknown. Authorities are continuing with their investigation. Argentine President Javier Milei met Donald Trump at US conservative conference, where he praised Trump's plan for reciprocal tariffs on imports. They both also discussed Milei's economic reforms and closer ties between their countries, with Trump inviting Milei to visit Washington soon. Milei echoed Trump's views, criticized state control, and defended Elon Musk's budget-cutting plans. The town of Buriticupu in Brazil's Amazon region is facing a growing crisis as massive sinkholes threaten to swallow homes. Around 1,200 people are at risk after the city declared a state of emergency due to the expanding holes, which have already destroyed several buildings. The problem has been worsening for 30 years, caused by heavy rains, sandy soil, deforestation and bad urban planning. People across Latin America prayed for Pope Francis after the Vatican said he was in critical condition in a Rome hospital. Catholics from South America attended masses, lit candles, and prayed for his recovery. Many feel a strong connection to Francis because he is from Argentina. In Buenos Aires, his image was projected on the famous obelisk, and communities across Argentina were called to pray for him. In Brazil, churchgoers also joined in prayers for the Pope and the global Catholic Church. 5 US adoptees taken as infants during Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet's regime have reunited with their biological families in Chile. This marks the first time in nearly 40 years that the adoptees have come together with their birth families. The adoptees, who grew up in different parts of the US, discovered their origins through a MyHeritage DNA test. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has applauded UK support and leadership in the war with Russia. This comes as Britain is set to impose fresh sanctions on Russia, and PM Starmer is prepared to meet US President Donald Trump. Meanwhile, the latest strikes in Ukrainian capital have killed at least one. Here is a full report.
As the negotiations for the Russia-Ukraine war are developing on various fronts, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has praised ally UK for showing leadership in the war.
Говорив з прем'єр-міністром Британії, ми скоординували наші позиції, нашу дипломатію. Ми цінуємо, що Британія прагне зберігати лідерство в захисті життя і просто нормальності.
This comes after the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, pledged his ironclad support for Kyiv in a phone call and insisted that Ukraine must be at the heart of any negotiations on a peace deal with Russia. Meanwhile, UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy said that London will unveil a significant package of sanctions against Russia on Monday, adding that it was time to turn the screws on Putin's Russia. On the other hand, in the latest twist, US President Donald Trump has asked for compensation for the wartime aid his predecessor Joe Biden gave Ukraine.
The United States has given $350 billion because we had a stupid, incompetent president and administration. So I want them to give us something for all of the money that we put up, and I'm going to try and get the war settled, and I'm going to try and get all that death ended. So we're asking for rare earth and oil, anything we can get.
These developments come as Trump is set to accelerate the negotiations with several meetings lined up. On one hand, UK PM Starmer and French President Emmanuel Macron are set to visit Washington next week. On the other hand, a second meeting between representatives of Russia and the US is planned for the next 2 weeks, according to Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov. He added that preparations for a face-to-face meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin were underway. From the battleground, Russia launched several waves of missile and drone attacks overnight targeting Kiev and other parts of Ukraine. The attacks have killed at least 1 civilian and damaged buildings and infrastructure. With such developments in negotiations and continued attacks, the following weeks will be consequential for the ongoing war. Bureau Report, NewsX.
We will now take a look at some news updates from across Europe. A French convict who went on the run after escaping a police van has been arrested in Romania. According to the French police, the convict, Amra, also known as the Fly, has links to a major drug gang in Marseille, France. 2 prison officers were killed when a vehicle carrying Mohamed Amra was attacked by men using military-grade assault weapons in May 2024. President Emmanuel Macron hailed his capture a formidable success. Starting this week, the Morbihan Criminal Court will start the trial of Joel Lee Soignac. According to reports, he is suspected of being France's biggest paedophile criminal. Joel is accused of aggravated rape and aggravated sexual violence against 299 victims, most of them children. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison in 2020 for rape and sexual abuse of 4 minors, but this withdrew a year later. Polish President Andrzej Duda met US President Donald Trump in Washington, where he mentioned that the US presence in Poland and Central Europe should be boosted. Duda told reporters after the meeting that Trump said he would rather expect a boost of US presence concerning Poland. Later, he mentioned the US president told him that as some of the most credible allies, he should not be worried. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said it was in the interest of US President Donald Trump to stand by Ukraine. According to reports, Starmer mentioned it is in UK and US interest to stand by Ukraine with a security guarantee. This statement comes after he visited Washington to meet Donald Trump. He added that every time he has spoken to Trump, he has stuck by his commitment to peace. Londoners march in support of Ukraine to mark 3 years of the war. Protesters started the march near the statue of Saint Volodymyr, which is a national saint of Ukraine, in West London. Later, they marched towards the Russian embassy while waving Ukrainian flags and signs of support. Britain has been a key backer of Ukraine by providing financial and military support to Kiev and opening its doors to over 250,000 Ukrainian refugees. Tragedy has struck Mulhouse, France, where a knife attack has left 1 person dead and 3 officers injured. A 37-year-old man has been arrested and authorities have launched a terrorist inquiry. Now let's take a closer look at the full report.
In a tragic incident in Mulhouse, France, a knife attack has left 1 person dead and 3 police officers injured. A 37-year-old Algerian man has been arrested, and a terrorism inquiry has been launched after the suspect reportedly shouted Allahu Akbar. The assailant seriously injured 2 officers, 1 in the neck and 1 in the chest. A 69-year-old Portuguese man who tried to intervene was fatally stabbed. The suspect had reportedly been on a terrorism watch list and was subject to a deportation order, though he had not been expelled from France. President Macron has condemned the attack as an Islamist terrorist act, reaffirming the government's commitment to fighting terrorism. He has also extended his condolences to the victim's family.
J'ai eu un instant le ministre de l'Intérieur qui m'a rapporté les principaux éléments qui étaient en sa connaissance. Il s'exprimera ce soir pour donner les détails sur le dossier. Le procureur s'est saisi et le PNAT s'est donc saisi, qualifiant ainsi cet acte d'acte terroriste. Dans un autre cadre, je voulais évidemment m'exprimer suite à l'attentat terroriste de Mulhouse, pour d'abord exprimer mes condoléances à la famille de la victime et dire la solidarité de toute la nation pour la victime et en effet sa famille et ses proches.
The attack occurred near a market during a demonstration supporting the Democratic Republic of Congo. Local residents have expressed shock, with Mulhouse's mayor calling it a moment of horror. French Prime Minister Bayrou has denounced the attack, while Interior Minister Retailleau highlighted the failure to expel the suspect and called for changes in detention center operations. Bureau Report, NewsX.
Now let's take a look at some news updates from the Indo-Pacific. Yemen's Houthi rebels recently launched surface-to-air missiles at a US F-16 fighter jet and an MQ-9 Reaper drone. Both attacks were unsuccessful, with the missiles failing to hit either of their targets. This incident marks a significant escalation as it is the first time Houthis have targeted US F-16. Analysts believe that this attempt indicates improvements in the Houthis' air defense capabilities, potentially posing greater risks to coalition aircraft operating in the region. The Cook Islands have entered a 5-year agreement with China to collaborate on the exploration and research of seabed mineral resources within its territorial waters. The partnership aims to assess the potential of deep-sea mining, which could offer economic opportunities but also raise environmental concerns. New Zealand and several Pacific nations have warned about the risks of mining to the marine ecosystems. Officials from the Cook Islands argued that proper regulations will be in place to protect the environment. The Financial Action Task Force has removed the Philippines from its grey list of jurisdictions under increased monitoring for money laundering and terrorist financing. This move signals progress in the country's financial reforms and is expected to facilitate smoother international transactions. Officials believe the removal will lower costs for remittances and boost investor confidence. The Philippines has been on the grey list since 2021 and implemented significant reforms to combat financial crimes to achieve this status. New Zealand has reported that a Chinese naval vessel conducted a second live fire drill in international waters near its territory. The exercise involved firing of live rounds that caused the diversion of several commercial flights. Prime Minister Christopher Luxon expressed concerns over the lack of adequate notice and the potential risks to civilian activities in the area. China, however, maintains that it followed international laws and notified relevant authorities before conducting the drills. Australian Treasurer Jim Chalmers is set to meet with US Treasury Scott Bessent in Washington. They are set to discuss potential exemptions from tariffs on steel and aluminium imports from Australia. This meeting follows a recent conversation between President Donald Trump and Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. During said meeting, Trump agreed to reconsider Australia's exclusion from the tariffs. Chalmers emphasised that while he does not expect a final decision during this visit, he aims to lay the groundwork for a future agreement that would benefit Australian exporters. The Democratic Republic of Congo faces escalating conflict as President Félix Tshisekedi announces a unity government. With rebel advances and extremist attacks intensifying, the region braces for further turmoil. Here's a look at the full report.
President Tshisekedi announces a unity government to address the eastern crisis. M23 rebels, allegedly backed by Rwanda, have captured Goma and Bukavu, escalating the conflict.
Bukavu est libéré et on va libérer d'autres coins si cela est nécessaire. Parce qu'il y a d'autres compatriotes, d'autres Congolais qui sont au-delà de Bukavu, mais qui souffrent comme les Bukaviens souffraient avant qu'on arrive ici.
Nous sommes de Bukavu, de la police de Bukavu.
Oui, nous venons de plusieurs coins de Bukavu. On n'est pas seul de Bukavu. Il y a d'autres qui sont venus de Vira, les autres de Minova, et nous tous nous sommes là.
Hundreds of Congolese police have defected to M23 in occupied areas, complicating security efforts. The Allied Democratic Forces, an ISIS-linked militant group, have beheaded 70 Christians in a church attack in North Kivu province, DRC. According to reports, all of the deceased were natives of the Lubero district of Congo. The ADF continue to target Christian communities, causing mass displacement. This marks a gruesome escalation in violence. The United Nations Security Council strongly condemns the M23 offensive, calling for an immediate ceasefire.
En dépit des multiples appels internationaux à un cessez-le-feu et à la cessation des offensives, le M23, soutenu par l'armée rwandaise, a continué sa progression dans les provinces du Nord Kivu et Sud Kivu. Cette avancée a eu des conséquences dévastatrices, entraînant la perte de nombreuses vies humaines lors de la prise de contrôle de Goma.
President Tshisekedi urges the US and Europe to invest in Congo's mineral wealth to help stabilize the region. The situation remains fluid, with humanitarian agencies struggling to provide aid amidst the escalating violence. Bureau Report, NewsX.
Now let's take a look at some updates from the world of business. Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway reported that operating profit set a record in the fourth quarter for the third straight calendar year, owing to higher investment income in its insurance businesses. The company's cash holdings reached $334 billion, double from a year earlier, mostly due to stock sales, including the sale of Apple and Bank of America's stocks. President Donald Trump signed an order directing the US to limit Chinese investments in key industries to protect national security. The order claims China is using US resources to strengthen its military and intelligence. Posing a threat to US, it also proposes new rules to control foreign access to American technology and knowledge. In response, China criticized the move, warning it would take steps to protect its interests. Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway plans to keep its investments in Japan's top 5 trading companies for the long term. These companies agreed to let Berkshire own more than the initial 10% limit on their shares. By the end of 2024, Berkshire's Japanese holdings were worth $23.5 billion. Buffett expects about $812 million in annual dividends from these companies. Japan's 7&i Holdings, the company behind 7-Eleven, has reportedly picked Bain Capital to buy a big part of its non-core businesses. Reportedly, Bain's offer values the deal at over 700 billion yen. These businesses being sold include supermarkets, baby goods stores, and Denny's restaurants in Japan. This move is part of Seven & i's plan to focus on its core operations. Stellantis is recalling over 27,000 Maserati cars in the US because of the rear-view camera image might not show up, which could increase the risk of accidents. The issue is caused by a software problem with the radio system, and it will be fixed with an update. The recall includes several models like the Grayscale, MC20, Gran Turismo, Levante, Glibi, and Quattroporte from 2021 to 2025. And that is all we have time for. We'll continue to bring you more news updates from across the world.